even today that, making promises you can't keep or you intend to keep them, but you have to be very careful. You know, a failure to confront somebody, somebody's hurting and they're hurting so bad where, you're basically ignoring them. Big mistake and failure to plan. Maybe staying down on the ground when you need to get up. I mean, those are all things that entrepreneurs. You fail your way to success. And I know as a CEO, that, Bill, and I think most people that listen to this, we've failed so many times, but it's those the one win that catapults your business.
Jerry Smith Jr. is the co-founder of Dial Environmental Inc., a company that he built from the ground up with his high school best friend, Steve Adams, in 1985. Starting with just one truck, Jerry helped transform Dial Pest Control into a trusted household name in northern New Jersey by delivering on promises, always showing up, and turning customers into his raving fans. After leaving the volatile mortgage industry, he was drawn to the stability of pest control, an industry driven by nature rather than by market fluctuations. As a true environmentalist, Jerry's passionate about green chemistry and innovation, constantly testing new solutions to enhance service and quality. The 2014 acquisition of Nature's Pro Lawn and Plant Healthcare expanded Dial's offerings, reinforcing its commitment to organic solutions and sustainable practices. Now approaching their 40th anniversary, Dial Environmental continues to uphold a family-oriented culture, prioritizing work-life balance, quality service, and a customer-first approach. Jerry is deeply involved in his community. He served on the National Pest Management Board of Directors, is the treasurer and past president of the New Jersey Pest Management Association, and has held leadership roles in Rotary and Project Main Street. As president of the Scott W. Richardson Memorial Fund, he remains dedicated to supporting youth programs and scholarships, reflecting his lifelong commitment to service and excellence. Now let's unravel the fingerprints on success of Gerald J. Smith. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Fingerprints on Success. It's great to be with you today. Today, I am joined by Jerry Smith, who is the founder of Dial Environmental Inc. Jerry, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Bill. Excited to share some fingerprints on success with you and your listeners.
Awesome. Well, that's what we love. All the entrepreneurs out there love hearing the great stories of other entrepreneurs and their journey. And, for you in starting a pest control company, give me a little bit of the story. Like how'd you get going? What inspired you? And tell us a little bit about the journey that you've been on.
Well, it's funny, pest control is a word and a service that I don't know how a lot of people can get inspired by that, that type of industry. But what really attracted me to it, really, it is my partner's fault, Steve Adams. High school buddies growing up, but it's all his fault. He knows that I have a business mind. He's more of a bench coach, and I'm more of an operations guy. But how we got started very simply was I was struggling in the mortgage business, and it was driven by the markets. And he revealed to me this Mother Nature driven business, and thinking that the work would never dry up.
Right, as long as Mother Nature is producing, then so to speak, it doesn't matter what the economy's doing, I guess.
Yeah, that's correct. The other thing I really liked about it is, Mother Nature was also causing the pain, and we were taking that away. So, those two things really, I really started to think about it. And I really don't think it mattered, Bill, of what service or endeavor it was. We knew we had the burn to help people. We wanted to do a good job. And I think this was the avenue to do it.
Yeah, and if I understand correctly, this was around 1985 that you started this?
I know. I'm happy to say I like to brag about this, but maybe I don't look 60 years old. But I started with Steve in 1985, wow. And we're coming up on 40 years.
Well, yeah, that's quite a journey. So take us back to the beginning, right? So it always starts with an idea. There's got to be conversation. You and Steve talk. Tell us about kind of how it gets going, the infant stages of the what became a new company.
Yeah, especially if our customers hear this, this would be something that would amuse them very much. But we started out in a conversation in a diner. Steve was helping his cousin who had this small company, Dial Pest Control, and at the time, his father was the fire marshal in New Jersey, flipping over rocks, and created a small customer base. But then his son fell on hard times and just vacated the business. Steve, my partner, was working for Lou, and he said, "Hey, we have an opportunity to really build a company that we have a few phone calls coming in, but I think with some energy, we can do this thing." And that's how it all started. The idea was we both had the burn, though. We're the same person. What's also interesting about our relationship is we've been together as partners for 40 years. I mean, try to find someone else in that category. It's very difficult to do. So, therefore, if you strip the outside of how we look and take an inside look of inside our soul, our drive, we're pretty much the same person.
Yeah. So in the beginning, is it, the old two guys in a truck,
It
literally?
is it is totally that. I had been looking. I was working, as I mentioned, in the mortgage business. Worked for Prudential Insurance. Had the cubicle type of game. Really, part of the herd, and I really had a problem with authority, and really had a hard time, being shoved into a cubicle, and needed to, evolve into a game maker. And I think, to help your viewers, I think that is the defining moment to become a game maker, to change the rules, become your own person, create your own game.
Yeah. So, you get started, um, and you start growing, you know, to give the audience a sense, like today, how many people do you have today working for the company?
Well, today we have, today it's always a good thing to begin with the end in mind, right? So today we have 20, it'll be 27 employees as we roll out March 1st to 25. We have 10,000 square foot a facility that houses warehouse, office. But we started out really with one truck, and we started out sharing an office on Church Street in Montclair, in the mid '80s, and going into the Gulf War in '92. And I could tell you that we had a big retailer in downtown Montclair. Looked very much different than it does today. But Haynes was there, and we Dial Pest Control was one of the only remaining companies going through a bad recession in '92. So we started out with a truck. We started to evolve and put on some people, but it was really I think people were buying Steve and Jerry more than a company. They saw that we cared. They saw we had conviction, and we were going to show up. If we said we're going to be there, we're going to be there.
Yeah. So, how did people love to talk about growth and scale, right? So, in essence, if you look at the history of the business, every 20 months or so, you added another human being, right? So this consistent, steady growth over a long period of time. What do you attribute, that success to, right? The methodical, consistent growth of a company, year after year, through I'm sure good time, good economies, bad economies. I mean, you've got a long measuring period here to be able to judge by, and here you go, and you keep growing. What do you attribute it to?
I attribute it to, I think every person is born with a personality. Okay. But I think it's character that you have to build. So I attribute a lot of our success and the fingerprints to people that are responsible for it. But some of those were authors. I look at, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. I look at Anthony Robbins and some of those things that I extracted out from Personal Power. And the seven habits of highly effective people by Stephen Covey. These were core character building values that I started to understand about moving from a pretty much independent person to interdependence. And I can share with you viewers the key change in my career was when I understood that if I can hire a technician to do 80% of what I can do in the field, it's acceptable. It's acceptable. And the other thing that we learned was that we had to go inside. I had to leave the field and actually operate the company. And I could talk to 30, 40, 50 people a day where I can only visit maybe 10 a day on the field.
Hmm.
So that was a very big change in our career.
Yeah. What do you think is are there any like misconceptions about your business, like just the pest control business in general, like things that people like get wrong or don't get about what you guys actually do?
Oh, I know. I mean, just think about that word exterminator.
Right.
That was the word. We evolved into pest control operator, then pest management. And it sounds like an accountant, right? But you're right. I mean, personally, I had to overcome that. I was in the mortgage firm, and I was kind of hiding that stigma. But what we learned was, you know, it, it appears to be a dirty job. You appear to be in an arena with harsh chemicals, and you have to have a lot of courage to be dealing with walking into an infestation of pests.
Mm,
But it's what gets you around those things is when you realize that you know, the EPA has a rating scale, and everyone's worried about these harsh chemicals, and it's more so today than ever. Back then, it was less worrisome, but the EPA has a rating scale, and if you choose green first, you set yourself up for as a champion because I think when you toss aside harsh compounds and you start to look at really good technology and things that work low grade with targeted treatments, and you can get around all that. And I think we've succeeded in that way. I mean, look underneath those. I mean, look underneath your cabinet and underneath your sink. I mean, you'll find you know harsh cleaning compounds. You use
really?
bleach in your laundry. Those are highly toxic compounds. And I think we got around that stigma. We communicated that we choose green first, and I think we've utilized those products and that type of marketing, and people grasped it early. We pushed that really early in our career.
Yeah, and I think probably a lot of people don't even know that there's a green option when it comes to, pest control,
Sure.
exterminating, whatever word people want to use. Most people just associate it, to your point, with like, oh well, you're killing pests, so you know, I would imagine a lot of people don't even realize there is a green option. But what you're saying is you guys actually lead with the green option.
We did, and we actually during COVID, when we were, luckily, and I say luckily because there was a big to do about this. Are we a necessary business? Or is it something protecting health and property? Are we going to include pest control in that? And
Mm,
we were an essential business and classified that. But to that point, furthermore, we actually gave our customers products that they could use and taught them how to do it because we could not enter the home. So it just, if you can grasp this type of, communication, and you can soften the blow about, harsh compounds and get people involved, educate, 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 it works out pretty well.
yeah, you mentioned the pandemic. It's like 5 years ago now, and I think we are all trying to like erase it from our memory. But you almost forget those impacts. Like even in a business like yours, you couldn't enter the home, and then how do you how do you work through that? How do you you know um, with some of the restrictions that the government had were really really tough on certain businesses, especially the ones that required direct human interaction. Um, that was so you guys pivoted to you know basically selling product and teaching people how to use it, to stay alive.
Yeah, the one silver lining with that though is we were, the N95 masks, the Tyvek, the gloves. So we were already utilizing those
Right. You
safety wear.
probably had them in your inventory when people started charging $20 a piece for them.
Yeah,
So
but you know, the other thing too about the stigma of the dirty job component. Um, we had to get around that, and I think choosing your market is very important there because if we ended up, let's say, servicing tenement buildings in the inner city, challenging, very challenging, and dealing with infestations and rodents and visible signs of these things rather than a residential home. So I think choosing your market is part of that.
yeah, and for our, because our listeners are not just national, but they're global. That watch and follow the show. Um, for their benefit, you mentioned Montclair before. That's a reference to Montclair, New Jersey, which today is a very nice, diverse yet relatively upscale community with various types of housing, but from well, let's say Aaron Rodgers bought a house in Montclair, so I guess that kind of sums it up when he became a
Yes.
New York Jet. So now, how long he's going to have that house, that remains to be seen, but we'll see. But it gives people perspective on where you targeted your market is an area, a prime residential uh, vicinity with good um, density of housing too. An area in this section of New Jersey that's relatively dense housing. So interesting. So you mentioned before, and you threw out a number of names. You threw out Covey and Tony Robbins, and made some references to some other kind of inspiring books and that you've read. Um, Talk to us a little bit about mindsets. Like when you think back and now you've had a 4-decade journey building a business, you've had a partnership that stood the test of time. Another big feat. I mean, in my world, as an attorney to entrepreneurs and closely held businesses, you know, we get a lot of phone calls about business partnerships breaking up, and um, you know, not not all of them last for 4+ decades. And not every business grows consistently over 4+ decades. So when you think back, do you think you had certain mindsets or ways that you approach things or philosophies you had that you think had a big impact on how you succeeded?
I do, Bill. I mean, and actually, it's funny. My son Jerry, who's the third. I put together a legacy book for him, the legacy and the building blocks of success. And I think that's what kind of you're asking me for. But I think the one pillar to success is the truth. If you operate in the truth, and this is your game as well, right? As an attorney, especially if you're dealing with a trial. I mean, what's the whole game? I mean, the game is I need to find the truth, and the judge has to ultimately rule on how good you do that. But with a business, everything's smoke and mirrors, everything's a house of cards unless you operate. You're able to confront people. People understand that you operate in the truth. You can't be broken. I think the other thing that we've instilled is that Steve and I genuinely will do anything to help our employees. And when they started to understand that, I think living living in a world where it's kind of an area and an escape. Work is an escape for a lot of our employees because they're entering an arena where they know they have a complete support staff. I consider myself really a servant to my employees and my customers. Who else do you run across in that arena that has that conviction and that mantra? I mean, it's a very good place, safe place to be. And we create that culture. And what my fear is that as the years go by, we're working so hard to instill that tradition, the greatest generation, which I was raised in, that you were raised in, that a lot of people are listening are raised in. And, you read, inspiring, kind of famous um, publications about striving valiantly from Theodore Roosevelt, about the man in the arena.
Sure.
And you just want to leave behind this legacy. And people recognize that in Steve and me, my employees. We have such a tight group. And, we're trying not only the belief system in that we care, but also to really transfer that on into customers' hearts and other employees. And I think operating on the truth, confronting people, hitting between the eyes, what is wrong, or how can I help you, rather than just giving them the keys to a truck and to say, have a great day. I think it's all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've always been a believer in radical transparency, so whether, so that everybody knows where they stand. Even in rendering advice to a client, like try to explain not just what the advice is, but specifically why I'm rendering it the way I am and why I have the opinion that I have, and explaining it. And same as you said goes for the people who work for you as well. Um, you know, it's without a doubt, radical transparency is, um, it's actually like a very freeing thing too, because when everything's just out there, and there's no secrets, no hidden agenda, no surprises. I mean, I think people, sometimes it can be uncomfortable, but most of the time, I think people prefer it, honestly. So,
Yeah,
um,
it's a great point. The
yeah,
truth does hurt sometimes, doesn't it? So,
right. But
yeah.
but better to know where you stand, right? And if it's everything's in the delivery too. I think, would you agree? It's it's also how you message to, whether it's an employee or a customer, how you communicate and how you message things. There's ways to deliver not so good news, but in a way that can be very constructive. So, let me flip it around on you. What are some things that you would do differently? When you look back, what are maybe some mistakes you made along the way, or things that, if you could kind of advise yourself 25 years ago, uh, and pass that advice back, things you might have said, you wish that you knew then.
Yeah, I mean, a great example of that is, one of those people. I'll name him. He's a great guy, Bill Kish. He was a mentor of mine. But Steve and I ran into some hard times. Or some of the pitfalls were we were so seasonal, and what that means is that all our revenue was coming in, when the weather broke and the spring and summer hit, and we were busy, and we were starving in the winter time. And we got so fed up that we called in another competitor, and instead of but what Bill did, instead of going after our company and maybe taking it apart in pieces, he brought me to an association meeting. He brought me to a trade meeting. He exposed the state association, then the national association. And that was one of the things. If I had done that earlier in my career, let's just say in year 1 or 2, rather than waiting to year 12, it would have catapulted me, because just like you're running the show and asking me questions to try to help, you know, try to pass on some of these success building techniques. That was available to me. And it's funny, when a mentor gets around young people, they want to share everything. And I couldn't understand that. I couldn't understand why a competitor would want to give me all their secrets, but it's just the general nature of people. When you age, you want to pass on things. And I think that really glared at me and really taught me a lesson.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the experience that you had getting that exposure. Like
Sure.
what kind of things came of that?
Sure. So, from the very first meeting, I think that number one, it's probably true in most associations, and even today, you have what it really exists is probably an older guard, people that have been there for a while. And what happens is you have a young buck or a young lady walk in, a young doe, and they walk into a room, and they lift the room up because you have the youth, you have your fresh ideas, you have all the excitement and motivation, and you have a lot of stamina. And I think that happened with me. What the example was is when I started to talk to people, I asked specific questions, and I got answers that I was we didn't have the internet presence back then that we have today. They weren't readily available. But what happened is friendships start, and you start to get invited to serve on committees, to serve the industry, and that comes more responsibility. And what generally happens is birds of a feather, right? They're just pulling you with you. And I can't take credit for a lot of our success in that regard, because all we were shown is how to do things the right way, how to build a revenue stream, which is monthly revenue each month of the year rather than a seasonal revenue, and take that triangular revenue uh, that we had and we struggled with, to just level that revenue throughout the year. So those were just specific examples of not only walking into instruction, but also hey, we need help. You can also teach, and you can also help our industry and volunteer. So
That's
big
great.
time.
Yeah, and I think that that transfers to so many different industries. Like almost every. I mean, I have clients in so many different verticals, and almost every industry or every client I could think of has some kind of association, national, local, and where people organize and share information, put on seminars, have joint programs, try to solve problems, all those things. And like you said, like birds of a feather, people tend to gravitate to each other. And people who get involved in those organizations also tend to have a mindset of not just being a taker but being a giver. And it's pretty fascinating how that works. And I see that repeat itself in so many different areas,
Yes,
with
yes,
national and local organizations. um,
yes.
yeah,
Some of the other things that even today, that making promises you can't keep, or you intend to keep them, but you have to be very careful. You know, a failure to confront somebody. Somebody's hurting, and they're hurting so bad where you're basically ignoring them. Big mistake, and failure to plan. Maybe staying down on the ground when you need to get up. I mean, those are all things that entrepreneurs. You fail your way to success. And I know, as a CEO, that, Bill, and I think most people that listen to this, we've failed so many times, but it's those the one win that catapults your business.
yeah. Well, that's there. e- No success comes unscathed. I mean, I think everybody has the you learn. The key is, do you learn from the mistakes? And then as you build a company too, and I'm sure you deal with this, the issue of allowing other people the opportunity to learn from their mistakes. And rather than micromanaging them to death and not letting them do anything. And you know um, that can be a real problem too. And I'm sure you've seen that throughout your career in different businesses, and how people manage people.
Yes, no doubt. And
Yeah.
who really wants to be managed, right? Who wants to be micromanaged?
No,
Nobody, right?
nobody.
But I think you change, when you look at when you look like an organizational chart, and this will help people visualize what we see here at Dial. Typically the CEO is in that top triangular piece, and then everything filters down underneath it. We put the customer there, and the next level underneath that top CEO level is our technicians, who deal and directly see them day in and day out. Then we have the management layer underneath that. And guess what? The foundation, the pillars are Steve and myself, the owners. We push up, we rise up the organization. So we show that visual to people so they understand that my job is to serve you. What do you need to succeed? How can I make your day better? And then if I'm asking that question, guess what? Management's asking that question.
Sure.
And, it seems to work for us very well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you made a reference to a fellow by the name of Bill, who you said kind of got you, exposed you to that, associations and things that or organized groups within your business. Do you have any other mentors that when you think back that you think made a huge influence on your path and your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I went right into the workforce right out of high school. And part of that reason was my family moved to Florida, but I was homesick back in New Jersey, so I left home relatively early in my life. So I had to support myself, and I had to get an apartment and all those things, and thought I would go to night school, but I never did. I went right into business. But in doing so, I ate tapes. Instead of going to a university, I lived for the motivational cassette tapes. I logged in hours and hours and hours of motivational tapes, and it really shaped me. I mean, it really got into my character, and it really shaped the person I became. So it wasn't for the lack of study. I mean, I would challenge anyone to to add up the hours that I've had,
Right.
head to head in an educational, situation. But Tony Robbins taught me, and I tell this story a lot. It's when I went to see him in the Jacob Javits Center, I was really struggling with my business, my partner. The problems with a partnership that you have to overcome is, you always feel that you may be doing more than the other. There's some great illustrations of that that are very famous, but to get past that, it was it was this: who is your anchor, and identifying that, and realizing that the instruction was, no matter how heavy that anchor is, it's attached to a very heavy chain, and just ignore that and start walking and pulling that chain and pulling that anchor, and guess what? Over time, that sharp edge and that massive anchor is going to become dull, and over time you're going to wear that anchor out. You just go and do what you need to do. Drag that thing with you to the point where you're just dragging chain. And the chain is very light. There's very little resistance. So that's what I did. That was a defining moment in my life. And I use that a lot when I run into some really tough problems. Personally, it wasn't easy having kids. We went the infertility route. It's something that's very common. Again, where's your anchor? Start pulling it and getting through that. Now we have 3 kids. So um, it's a very good example of endurance and perseverance.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about the listening to the Robbins tapes. I remember, uh, my dad would have been the generation right before you, and he was big on Zig Ziglar. That was his, and I mean, and I grew up in the car with my father listening to Zig Ziglar tapes constantly,
Yeah.
like every tape that the guy ever made, and he made a lot of them. And but it's funny, like, I mean, and I used to complain about it because as like a teenager, I'd want to like listen to music and I'd be like, oh my God, we're listening to Zig Ziglar tapes. But what's crazy is that, like, whether it was I was actually listening or by osmosis or whatever, like those themes have stuck with me for years. And my whole life, where I'll actually catch myself quoting a Zig Ziglar thing that literally I heard, 40 years ago, um, which is crazy. And his stuff's still out there. He that guy actually ended up living to like be almost 100 years old. He was like 90 something years old, and I think he just passed away a couple of years ago.
Oh
And
yeah, I was joining you in those. I mean, they were readily available, and shaped, I'm sure, a lot of people when you look at it. Begin with the end in mind with Stephen Covey. Every year, this year I had 14 line items that I wanted to accomplish, and traditionally I have 3. But you know, what does it look like when it's all complete, and work your way backwards? You know, figure out what you want and work your way backwards to get it. And it's a lot easier looking at things that way.
so speaking of Covey, let's go into, you know, What's your motivation? What, do you have a why statement, since you're, you mentioned him and like the master of the why statement, I believe, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, what motivates me is, teach them by showing them. Teach people, by showing them, walk with them, be there. Don't just preach and, get your hands dirty, show people that you're willing to walk with them and on the tough roads, be right there with them. I think, and for me, what motivates me is to share a win. I mean, sharing the win. If I realized early on that if my employees can get everything they want out of working for Dial, I'll get everything I want. But it
Yeah.
has to be in that order. It really does, and it's such a true statement. I mean, so you know, and I guess the the conviction and where that comes in is they know it. My employees know it. They know exactly what I want them to have, and they feel it. They know it. I think Steve transcends that the same way. We're so close in that regard. And when I look toward the future, everybody like yourself, I'm sure, um, you want to leave behind a great instrument to help others. I mean, I think this company leaving behind a legacy that we built for not only for having my son to take it on, but the employees that work for us, leaving that legacy, to having Dial grow. We get approached all the time. We're one of the few remaining family businesses in the state, and we rank high up there in as far as company size. But they're always knocking on our doors, and they just don't understand that the legacy means more to us than just selling out and selling our employees out. I mean, that's just not something that we're interested in doing.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember. I can't remember if it was Dan Sullivan that said it, but you quoted, in essence, the quote I think is, you get what you want in life by helping as many people as possible get what they want.
That's
And
right.
and I think that's, there's a lot of truth to that, and being a hero to others, um, which is also, by the way, really rewarding. On top of that, it's not just about what do you want; it's also about like the joy you get in doing that, which is awesome.
No
Um,
question.
so when what's kind of a topic that you've got hot on your mind these days? In terms of what's got you excited in the morning when you jump out of bed, and you've been doing this for 45 years. Like, what's got you fired up?
Well, I mean, the probably the hottest topic right now is finding blue collar workers,
Mm,
finding people who we talked about that earlier, getting past that stigma. Okay, what do you want to do for a living? I mean, I'm not going to apply to a pest control company or a lawn care company. I'm not sure I want to do that. And you know what the hot topic for us is getting past that. And how do we get past that? How do we solve that? And because what excites me, you asked me what really excites me about a new hot topic is having someone walk in the door, who, it's funny, once you build an organization that has this culture of caring and careful people and all those things that we talked about, the immediate there's no need for you to be have this art of really interviewing people. The group will toss that person out of the organization by themselves. These skills of hiring go out the door. Yeah, someone may get in and you don't do a good job in the hiring process, but ultimately the culture and the group, the team, will eliminate that person. So what excites me is finding those people, and how we're doing that is, we have, when you look at our building, 80% of it, 8,000 square feet is, warehouse, garages to keep stuff from freezing, drive-in bays and all this stuff. And only about 2,500 of that space of 10,000 is office space. And we're creating this hangout, we're creating this clubhouse in one of our warehouse bays. And you know, because that's a hangout. But instead of looking at concrete white walls and concrete gray floor, we're making this a clubhouse environment. And, we're putting in retirement. We're looking at flex schedules. We're not only creating a great environment, but all we're trying to do is to get someone caught in our web so we can bring them into our environment and hire them, and that's really the hardest thing for us right now, is just finding great people to do that.
Yeah, attraction and then retention, right, of talent is, um, it's interesting that you say that too, because when I ask people, like, what's got you up at night, um, retaining, or attracting and retaining the best talent, um, and it's everywhere. I mean, you're talking about the need for blue collar workers. I was talking to the head of an accounting firm last week who said, "Go try finding a bunch of highly qualified, available, skilled accountants." He's like,
CPAs, yeah.
he's like, "They're like unicorns." And I said, "Well, that's why is that?" He's like, "Nobody wants to be an accountant anymore." And so it's interesting that our workforce is, and I guess you see it, that unemployment is practically nothing. And it was interesting. I had a guest on one time who was an expert in human resource, uh, in general, like just like the whole process of human resources. And his name is Chris Zarnick, and he's written some books and everything. In fact, he wrote an essential book that Congress used as a blueprint for getting out of the Great Recession. And what I like about him is he's data driven. And you just talked about what your challenge is, and that you're tackling that head on, and that getting people into your culture and into your web. And he said the challenge is that it's data. The current workforce, if you look at like the baby boomer generation, which is now shrinking
Right.
and passing, so to speak. And he's like, and you look at the various generations, the current primary working generation is the smallest of the current living, let's say, four generations. It's the smallest one.
Isn't that amazing?
It's a matter of numbers, right? People that are in prime working years right now, call it, you know, uh, 30 to 60, or, 40 to 60, right in that, in their prime working years. It's the smallest generation that we have. So, um, and he said, so it's pure math, and everybody's experiencing a similar thing. Like, it's really kind of fascinating. Um, but yeah, you're in the people business, right? No matter what
Yeah.
business you're in, it's the people business.
Bill, I mean, absolutely. To your point, I mean, what else is there? I mean, what do we have without our employees? What do we have? We have nothing.
Right.
And you know, it's all about people. I mean, we provide a service, but it's the whole process, and it's the whole, actually meeting and greeting a new customer. Seeing the same customers for 20, 30 years. And how is Steven? How is Jerry? And creating that longevity. But it all starts with people, and I think that is the key. And to your friend's point there with data, I mean, we use Indeed almost exclusively, and it's a numbers game. But I'll tell you, something to help your listeners was that we started to position the ad differently, where we said, was your company acquired by a large national firm? Were you part of this acquisition where you lost the family business culture? You can have that here. We have it here. And that, I wasn't thinking of that before, but I'm talking with you, I realized that was a very interesting shift, because we were able to pull away multiple people from a few companies that lost that. So those are important little golden nuggets that you learn just tweaking things, right?
Yeah, just the messaging, what who you're looking for, right? Because by changing it around that way, um, and you're ahead of your time, by the way, because the same guy Zarnick writes about how you have to change how you advertise for someone to find the to get the right person to answer. Because it's not that you just want people to answer, you want the right person to answer. and you
So
and you
true.
tap and you tap into that, um and that concept of people want to do purposeful work, right? They do. They people want to have purpose and feel like they're doing purposeful work because that's very rewarding. And being part of a family business environment um, is very attractive for people. I mean, we have the same philosophy at our law firm. That it's we try to run it like a family business, no matter how large it gets in size. Trying to stick to that culture. Um, and you guys are doing the same thing, and obviously it's working and paying off for you. Uh,
Well, it's real. It's real. You can't. Well, we're real. Or the people that you meet that we employ, and even through the organization, we're real. And I think it's simple. It's common sense and simple that you want to have fun. It's work. Life is hard. Life is no joke, and it's nice to go. Sometimes I can do my training route, and it's like a vacation. For me. But people who find solace and they find happiness at work, you really never work a day in your life, and that's what we're creating. That's what's worked for us. That's why we have people that have the 25-year plaques. And it's amazing how old we're looking now, but it's
I don't
pretty
know.
rewarding.
For a guy who's been in business 45 years, like you look pretty darn good. So, or 40 years. Sorry,
Yes.
not trying to make it go faster than it already is. Right. Well, listen, Jerry, I can't thank you enough. Jerry Smith, co-founder of Dial Environmental. Thank you. Really appreciate you taking the time to be on our show. Um, Enjoyed spending time with you and hearing your story. And I'm sure that all of our entrepreneurs out there listening enjoyed hearing it, and I'm sure got some nuggets of and pieces from your success. So, thanks, and keep in touch with us so we can kind of hear about how things continue to go and how you grow into the future.
Will do. And thank you so much for inviting me on your show, Bill. And I'm hoping that some people get some real good insight and it helps people. And that's what it's all about. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.